Game of Thrones, Season 8. There's so much to talk about. What's on my list here? My favorite episodes. Okay. 4, 2, 3, 5, 1, 6. 4, 2, 3, 5, 1, 6. I think 4 and 2 are pretty close. Those could switch. 3 and 5 are pretty close. Those could switch. 6 was the worst episode to me, without a doubt. I think critically, episode 2 is probably the best, but I think I enjoyed watching 4 more than 2. Because that was like the real climax of the show. 4 was the climax, and then 5 was the release of all the tension. Biggest disappointment? Probably the White Walkers. The others. I just expected more from it in every way. I wanted them to get further than they did. Like maybe to the neck or the Riverlands. I wanted them to want something more than just the annihilation of humans. That's not very interesting. I expected at least like a 2-episode long sprawling battle, just a complete mess from Winterfell to the Riverlands. At least. Where we're just following these scattered mixtures of characters we know, going from Holdfast to Holdfast, and then falling back. It doesn't really make sense when I think about it. That's hundreds of miles. They can't just fall back hundreds of miles in the winter. But they have dragons and horses and Unsullied who are happy to die. It could have worked. I also kind of expected the Jon and Dany situation would have some sort of interaction with the others' White Walker situation. Because Old Nan said that the Night King is a Stark. And as far as I can tell in the books, Old Nan is the OG wise fool. And everything she's ever said seems to be coming true in a literal interpretation. Which is pretty exciting, because it means eventually we're going to see ice spiders big as hounds, and maybe the Night King really was a Stark. Which suggests that will actually matter at some point, and it's fun to speculate how. Improvements to episode 6. I think Drogon should have burned Jon to death, and then burned the throne. Or maybe ate Jon. I guess dragons only eat cooked meat, so he'd burn him first and then eat him. That way Jon's ending wouldn't have to be rotting at the wall for no reason, and his actions would have actually had consequences. You don't get to kill the mother of dragons and then escape Drogon's judgment. It would have been the coolest death scene in the whole show. He burns him, and then devours him, and the camera just stays there and watches the whole thing, as the most fit king in the world slides down Drogon's throat. There are no consequences anymore. The show lost its teeth. It might make the ending too bitter, but I think it's already too bitter. I'm having trouble finding the sweetness in this ending. Oh, I should revisit my predictions. Okay, let's see. Dany was the bad guy, but that one was easy. The Iron Bank plot, that was super wrong. Well, I don't know. I prefer to believe that it was right, and what the show did was wrong. Sansa and Tyrion, they didn't honor their marriage. But I'm kind of glad they didn't, because I've changed my mind about that. I wouldn't wish Sansa upon my worst enemy. She's not my Sansa. And Bronn was actually nobody. But I like the Castamere theory. That's really good. Just the irony of it. Tyrion's family exterminated his family, and caused all of Bronn's misery from the time he was a child. But Bronn saves his life anyway. That's pretty cool. Future of the YouTube channel. More Game of Thrones. Followed by more A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm definitely going to talk about Targaryen madness. Then I might talk about Sansa and Cersei. But the books are really where my heart's at. I need to finish an essay about Jorah. And I'm starting a series about Daenerys. That'll eventually lead into the Jorah stuff. But I'm pretty slow because I don't really know what the hell I'm doing. I'm just learning as I go. Other TV shows. I'd be tempted to do Westworld, but I probably won't, but we'll see. Daenerys. Oh boy. Dany's ending was controversial, to say the least. Not to me, but now I'm probably going to alienate everyone. But this is my honest opinion, and that's more important to me. Okay. It's story time. I wouldn't bother you with my story, but I know I have a closer perspective than most people. That can be as likely to make my opinions more wrong as to make them more right, because bias is a thing. But I'll let you and future me be the judge of that. And I think it's important to have a record of this, before my memories and the lessons in them are faded by time. The year is 2015. I've just binged Game of Thrones to the end of Season 4, just in time for Season 5. Needless to say, it left an impression on me, so I went and read everything published in the book series. I wasn't a big reader, but I had read and enjoyed Harry Potter, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Dark Tower, and a bunch of Stephen King. A Song of Ice and Fire is easily my favorite thing I've ever read. So I started consuming theories and analyses like a madman and writing some of my own. I was about 15 years late to the party, and there were already Mad Queen Dany theories around. George R.R. Martin's comments on the Meereenese Blot lent them some credence, but the consensus, I would judge, was still 99% not convinced that Dany would go full Mad Queen. If you were critical of Dany, you could generally expect to be ignored. And some of that ignoring was warranted, I think, because early criticisms of Dany weren't very well fleshed out. The frustration of having your opinions marginalized and ignored. It has a tendency to taint your future criticisms of Dany by causing you to exaggerate her villainy and to fail to acknowledge that her situations are, admittedly, difficult and sympathetic. The Meereenese Blot was sympathetic, and I think that's why people were more receptive to it. As for me, I was only slightly in favor of the Mad Queen Dany ending. My initial reaction to it was that it would just be pretty interesting, in a tragic kind of way. My analysis of the books was focused on Arya for a long time, and I had always meant to get around to Dany, but she was on the back burner. And then Season 7 happened, and everything about it, from the dialogue, the acting, the cinematography, is what convinced me that, okay, Mad Queen Dany's probably legit. The show's doing it. When I went to talk about it with people, I was surprised that the consensus was still over 90% not convinced that Mad Queen Dany was happening. I got into tons of discussions and debates about Dany, and I learned all of my opponent's points from front to back. Dany's situation is sympathetic. Two wrongs make a right. The ends justify the means. These are the foundation of Dany's defense. And after a certain point, the ad hominem attacks began. They wanted to call me sexist. I must have something against women, because I don't think it's okay for Dany to burn people alive. Because I don't think it's okay to kill prisoners. To drag someone to death behind your horse. Lock people in a vault to cannibalize and starve. Feed them alive to animals. And nail people up on crosses. Here's an actual quote from the head moderator of one of the communities from which I was banned for having a different opinion on Daenerys. I can't wait until Season 8 is over, so that all these Dany haters can shut the fuck up. So that's the level of possession that a lot of the Dany truthers have been dealing with for years. During these debates, something very interesting happened. I started getting supportive messages in private from people who agreed with me, but who were afraid to support me publicly. So that made me say, Game of Thrones has managed to create a very interesting environment. How does the saying go? Only in an empire of lies does the truth become treason. Our Game of Thrones fandom here is living a little slice of Nazi Germany, a little slice of Soviet Russia, and modern-day North Korea. People are afraid to speak the truth for fear of punishment from the authorities who reside over our fan communities. Fast forward to today. Dany blows up King's Landing, and everybody wants to say it came out of nowhere. It's like, wait a minute, if this came out of nowhere, how were so many people able to predict it so long ago? And sure enough, when I look back at those scenes, all the development is there. The ramping up and normalization of cruelty, and the degradation of her conscience because of it. The bad advisors who lead her down the path of revenge, and the good advisors who warn her against it, and who go ignored. Dany's doing the same thing she's always been doing. The only thing that's changed is our perspective on the people she's doing it to. Because I didn't care to voluntarily extend my sympathy to the people she was doing it to before, the sympathy of the people she's doing it to now is inflicted upon me involuntarily. The message being, go back and try to extend your sympathy to the people she was doing it to before.
The head of a young boy that I'd cured of fever just 3 months past. So, tell me again exactly what it was that you saved.
So, this didn't come out of nowhere. For the most part, we just weren't paying attention to the things we needed to pay attention to. I must have been distracted by her luxurious platinum braids. I think Daenerys was a thermometer for our society's vulnerability to tyrants. We didn't reach greater than 50% consensus that Dany needed to be stopped until the moment she killed 1 million people in the name of mercy, justice, and necessary cost. And even after the fact, the majority response is denial. It's easier to criticize the story than to admit we fell for a tyrant. Someone has asked me, why are they trying to make me feel guilty for supporting Daenerys? I think everybody supported Daenerys in the beginning, so I don't think it's a question of whether or not we supported her. It's a question of, when was the moment we stopped supporting her? Where was the line where I said, she's gone too far, I don't agree with this? And was that line early enough that we could have stopped her? For me it was the Tarly executions, which I think is far too late to have stopped her. So, as it turns out, our societies are hyper-vulnerable to the next Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler, and we have a lot of thinking to do. I think this is what stories are for. They teach us important lessons, so that we don't have to make the mistakes for real. The media. It looks like a lot of the media and creators have noticed the outrage against Season 8, specifically regarding Daenerys, and they've hopped on the bandwagon. They're taking clips of actors who've been asked how do they feel about the end of the story, and then they express what seems like negative emotion, which, in light of the ending, was obviously meant to convey that it's tragic. But the media is misrepresenting it to mean that the ending was bad, not that it was tragic. I think Kit Harington's "fuck themselves" comment is all the evidence we need that he thought the show was great, and what he meant by disappointing was tragic. So there's a lot of misrepresentation going on in the media. So, if I'm not going to pretend that Starbucks cups and water bottles are valid criticisms, then what did I think about Season 8? It was pretty rough. Let's be honest. There's a lot of little things like Sam suggesting democracy was goofy. That's a conversation that I've had a few times before, because it would just be a really stupid ending to leap from feudalism to full-on democracy. But, so to have that happen on screen was just like fourth wall breaking. It was like a fan fiction that I would write as hyperbole to demonstrate how stupid of an ending it would be. My biggest criticism, a lot of people aren't going to like this, but I don't care. I think it's true. My biggest criticism of the show has to be the Marxist feminist crap that they started introducing a long time ago, when they turned Arya's list into like a badass triumphant thing, rather than the tragic, feeble thing that it is in the books. This part of the video was originally much longer, but I realized this topic is way too big for the scope of this video. It'd have to be a whole separate one. How third-wave feminine Marxism ruined Game of Thrones. That'd be fun. That'll piss some people off. I think AOC's comments about the ending were very revealing about what's going on politically. We're not concerned with whether or not the person in power is qualified for power. We're only concerned with whether or not the person in power is a woman, despot or not. I'd rather not get into politics. I just want to analyze swords and dragons. But what are you supposed to do when the writers start twisting your favorite story with their politics? I think a lot of people would stay silent about it, but I don't happen to be one of them. So the writers made it political. When, for example, they turned Meryn Trant into a pedophile, so that the character whom they've cast as the champion of the ideology to which they're pandering can beat up on him like a punching bag. That was when it became political. This comes up in discussion all the time. Someone will ask, Why is it so bad for Daenerys to be cruel, if it's okay for Arya and Sansa to be cruel? And they're right. Those are glaring contradictions in the lessons that Dany's story is trying to send. It isn't cool when anybody does cruelty. That premise is consistent in the books, and inconsistent in the show, because the writers thought it would be cool if women could get away with cruelty against men, and not be murdered by the friends and family of their victims later, and not to have that cruelty degrade them, but to actually improve them. So it's no wonder to me why people are so confused about Daenerys. But that's my biggest criticism of the show, for sure. Questions and answers. Dave and Dan raced to the finish line. Yeah, I agree with that. Whole season was rushed. It could have been 10 episodes easily. Maybe even 20. How do I think Martin will finish the books? Well, Isaac Hempstead Wright said that King Bran was told to him by Martin. I'm kind of bummed Isaac told us that, but there's no use crying over spilled Jojen paste. So we can still talk about the how and the why for King Bran, which should be an interesting discussion. I think of Bran's story as he's being tempted with unimaginable power. He abuses the power he has, and he seems positioned to gain even more power, and to be mentored by a man who's been wielding unimaginable power for a long time. If Bran can manage to get his act together, to discipline himself and overcome his natural human instinct to succumb to the temptations of power, then a person like that might be one of the few people who can rule for a lifetime without being corrupted by the position. As for Dany's ending, yeah, that's definitely happening in the books. Her only two possible endings, I think, are she becomes the villain and she has to be killed, or she realizes she's the villain and then sacrifices herself for something greater. That's it. Those are the only two possible Dany endings, I think. And then the other's ending, I have no idea. That's kind of what makes it so interesting. There seem to be all these mysterious pieces in play, but nobody knows how to connect them yet. Would it be better if they cut back on the number of plot points to match the shortened season? I don't know. I guess it depends on what a plot point is. So take something like Arya and Gendry's romance. You could cut all of that out, and the story would still make complete sense. So maybe that isn't a plot point, but more of a character moment. But at the time we saw it, we didn't know that it wasn't a plot point. Maybe this will have a big effect on the future of the story. Like Arya and Gendry will get married and go exploring together or something. Brienne being knighted is another scene that didn't really affect the future of the story. But those character moments are, I think, a big reason why Episode 2 seems to be the favorite episode. So I think the original mistake was shortening the season in the first place. And then more development like that would have been better. And then the broken, unearned feeling comes from all the contrivances that they did. They're ignoring the rules of the setting all the time to make the plot go in the direction they want it to go. And we can feel that invisible hand, I think. Actions don't have consequences. I think an article in Scientific American described the show's problem really well, which is a shift from sociological storytelling to psychological. I'll put a link down below. If Bran can't be king for not having a drop of Targaryen blood, why would Sansa be next? Yeah, good question. I was thinking that right after I said it. I was like, no, it wouldn't go back to Sansa. It'd go to Gendry, because he's the only verified Targ. Because Robert had a drop of Targ. All hail King Gendry. Okay, guys. I think this is a good place to stop. I've heard quite enough of my own voice for a while. Everybody's got opinions, so tell me yours. Thank you all for listening. I'm humbled that there are actually 7,000 people who liked a thing I made enough to sign up for more things. Valar Morghulis, and all that good stuff.